Today, we're at the Impact Players Conference in Belfast, and I've just had the pleasure of hosting a live podcast conversation with two amazing athletes, both of whom are Olympians. Danielle and Jessie took time and shared their talent and insights into their 3 points around asking to win.
So I'm Jessie Barr and I'm a Sport and Performance Psychologist at the Sport Ireland Institute.
Yeah, my name is Danielle Hill and I'm an Irish international swimmer. I think the majority was about my story and my transition to bringing Jessie on board as part of my performance team and how that has helped and got me to where I am on the world stage.
Hopefully people can take some lessons from what we've talked about, from Danielle being so open and vulnerable, how she recognised that, went and asked for help and then asked to win. Yeah, and just kind of knowing that asking for help is a strength, not a weakness, that being vulnerable can be your superpower and can drive you on in performance and just in your general day-to-day life.
There's value in every story. You know, I've had so many people come up to me and thank me for sharing it. And so that's something really special because I just see it as, you know, my story and what I've done. But to know that it's having an impact on people is quite nice, and not always a bad thing just to put yourself out there.
The main takeaway that I want folks to leave with is that it's not only just okay to ask for help, but it's a necessity if you want to be the best version of yourself. We debated the title, and the one that we ended up with was asking to win. Danielle, tell me about why that's important to you, this concept of asking to win or reaching out for support.
Yeah, so I suppose for those that don't know, Jessie is my sports psych and newly brought on board nearly 2 years ago. Basically was struggling within swimming. As Gabby said, you know, people only really see you on the TV every 4 years. But I've been doing this sport for 20 years and it takes its toll. And we've mentioned as well burnout, and it was getting to a stage where I was training and I was doing the work and I was getting to the big competitions in the summer and just nothing was clicking. It wasn't happening and I was underperforming, not by anyone's standards, but my own. But at the end of the day, I had to hold myself accountable. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't what I wanted. And so I looked for help. And within the Sports Institute, I had help from Gary Longwell, which was a former rugby player. And I gave it a go for about 4 months, 6 months, and it was great. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. That's me fixed. This is great. Ready to go again. And then I went to the Commonwealth Games and I walked away and I was 8th again for the second time. And I thought, what is going on? And I thought, okay, well, we've got another goal here. We're going to try for World Championships the following year. And I had the worst World Championships, the most lonely World Championships I think I can ever say in my whole life. I've never felt so lonely. You know, a championships that was supposed to be my whole world. You know, this was the highlight of my career, my first Worlds. And I didn't want to be anywhere else but my bed. And I kind of discovered at those championships that maybe there was something a little bit deeper outside of sport that I was struggling with. And I said, okay, well, the only thing that I'm missing, you know, I have a great coach, I have a gym coach, I have a nutrition. Only thing, that piece that I'm missing is the sports psych, and it's someone that isn't your mom or dad saying that they understand, you know, because of course they're going to understand you and they're going to fight for you. And it's nice that I talked to Jessie for the first time, and as an ex-athlete, as a female, whatever it is, she just understood in a different way, you know. And I sat in tears for the hour. And from that moment, you know, I didn't want to swim for 6 weeks before that. That was the longest break I'd ever had from swimming. And I came away from the conversation wanting to just jump in water. And I thought, okay, well, that is the step that I needed. And she's been, yeah, the extra 10% or the 1%, whatever you want to put it as, that has now got me to performing on the biggest stage.
What an amazing story. Give a round of applause. Good for you, Danielle, and thanks for sharing. I just love how you've set the stage for this conversation. And what I've also loved is, well, you acknowledge your folks, which is
Yeah.
great, your family, and that you had a great team around you. And the second thing that I heard you say, Danielle, was, look, perhaps physically you were in great shape and you were doing all the right stuff from a training and the body stuff, but the mind maybe was going elsewhere and you needed some support, and you sought Jessie out, which is fantastic. Jessie, yeah, tell us about kind of why this concept of asking to win is important to you. I mean, seems a bit silly because this is literally your vocation and your job.
Yeah, look, I'm obviously a bit biased because usually someone comes to me because they have asked for help. But, and I think when we were talking about planning for this podcast, and something that, you'd asked for was, what are anecdotes you could share? And, my job now is a sports psychologist, and I not expect, but hope that athletes would want to bring me the way Danielle did bring me in as part of their team. But when I was an athlete, I didn't, because I thought I knew better. I was studying it. I knew what I'm studying. I know what they're going to say. I don't need that. And I probably did exactly what Danielle did. And I leaned on family, on friends who didn't maybe have the right skill set, were very emotionally invested. And yeah, asking for help is brilliant. But I think it's recognizing that it's the right help at the right time from the right person, and that's the right fit for you. You mentioned you'd worked with a different sports psychologist. Some people just aren't always the right fit at the time, and I'm not always the right fit for every athlete either. But I think asking for help and the kind of topic of asking to win, I think we see that idea of asking for help as a weakness, and this idea that if I ask for help, I'm admitting failure, I'm admitting there's something wrong. And that's just not the case at all. If you're asking for help, yes, it's vulnerable, but vulnerability can be a huge strength as well. It's kind of letting someone seeing you, warts and all, and then letting them build you back up.
Yeah.
And it's a real privilege that that's what I get to do now as an athlete. There's a real selfishness, and I'm not saying Danielle is selfish, but there's a selfish pursuit when you're an individual athlete. So sometimes asking for help, it's like you're seeing it as widening your circle and seeing it as that's something that I wasn't able to do on my own.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel as an individual athlete, you're meant to be able to just take all this on your own. And I think I'm using the athlete term, but I think that could be applied to so many different industries that I've taken this on my own, therefore I should be able to just do it. And why? Why should we be able to do everything? My skill set is to help someone. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a physio. I have a very specific skill set. And yeah, I think that idea of asking to win, I love, because I have seen in real time the benefit of those who do choose to ask for help and do and end up making, performance benefits, even if it's just having someone else to vent to, having someone else to be that support. So that's why this
Yeah.
topic's really important to me.
And it's clear that that happened in your relationship, Danielle and Jessie, because Danielle, you focused a lot. I think you mentioned it twice at least. It was about being lonely, and that was the loneliest you felt. So having that support. And then Jessie, your point about the right help at the right time. What strikes me, and it actually we're starting to dip into our first point, which we're going to get to in a moment. What strikes me as really interesting is some of us are maybe more comfortable asking for help, but certainly in my experience, working with a lot of women, it can be perceived as a weakness, more from a women's perspective. And so I love the reframe. And again, just leaning into Gabby's sort of like, hey, I'm gonna win. And I love the reframe of what we're talking about is this was about getting back into the pool for Danielle, getting to peak performance. So certainly this feels like the right time to jump in. Like, your first point that we're going to discuss, Danielle, is why asking for help makes you stronger, not weaker. So tell us a little bit more about that experience of asking for help from the likes of Jessie and perhaps your other team as well, and how that's kind of made you stronger.
Yeah, I think if anybody knows me, they know that I hate speaking.
This is the perfect environment for Danielle.
This is absolutely my worst nightmare. But no, yeah, the reason that I reached out, it was I either walked away from something that I loved, or I simply sat down to just have a conversation. And I did promise that I wasn't going to get emotional today, but I lasted all of 15 minutes. That's great. So you can imagine how the conversation went with Jessie the first day. But yeah, it was a case of, walking away from the friends, everything that I had built over 20 years, the travel, all the little bits, even the training, walking away feeling satisfied you've done something really well, and walking away from all of that completely, or literally just choosing to sit down and talk to somebody. And it wasn't even a case of, we're talking about asking for help, but it was just a case of sitting down and sharing how I thought and how I felt, and what was going on in my head. And, we've talked about culture quite a lot. And, for me within Swim Ireland at that time, the culture wasn't brilliant, but it wasn't going to change, and culture starts at the top, unfortunately. And if that wasn't going to be the change, then I needed to be the change that I wanted to see. And that's how I took it, and it was like, okay, well then I've got to work on myself, make myself bulletproof. And that's where the conversation started.
Yeah.
And it was, how can I get back the old Danielle, the one that, why did you start? The little 5-year-old kid, why did you get in the pool? And as soon as I rediscovered that, like the rest that year was a fairy tale, like it was.
Yeah, you've mentioned getting back to your younger self, and again, a theme for today's impact players has been around finding your own race. And I suspect oftentimes for any of us, we find ourselves running a race and thinking, what the hell are we doing here? This is not where I want to be. I'm curious, Danielle, what was the driving force for you at the time to seek out support from Jessie? Was it about, I want to get back to winning ways, or was it at an earlier stage of your thinking where you were just like, I just want to be excited to get back in the pool?
Yeah, I think it was a hard one. I think it was rediscovering the love for swimming. But I also coach 7 days a week, and
Seven, is that all?
yeah,
Seven?
just all seven. Yeah. But yeah, I coached the most amazing group of kids, from 9 right through until they're 15. Some competitive, some want to be world beaters, some are just there for a chat with me, to be honest. And it was those guys that really inspired me. It was like, I can't walk away from this incredible group of kids that think so highly of me, that believe in me more than I'll ever believe in myself. They worship the ground that I walk on. And I thought, you know, they remind me every evening I go to swim, no matter what my day has been, they remind me why I do it. And it was coming back to those guys, and it was putting more into those guys the more I got out. And they were a perfect example. Is like, I went to Olympic trials, and for anyone that doesn't know swimming, 50 meters takes 24 seconds. They came down, they traveled 2 hours to watch me swim 24 seconds. So they were the most incredible people, and I think I discovered, through the conversations, that that's why I do it. It's those people, creating a path for those guys. And at that first little hurdle or second little hurdle, I can't stop. Because what does that show them?
That's fantastic, Danielle. I think, yeah, round of applause for sure. Someone very important to me in my life said that one of the single greatest human flaws that we have is our inability to take perspective. And so that decision that you're making 7 days a week, by the way, to invest in young people, to spend time with them and just have a chat, that sounds like it's really, helped you zoom out, take perspective, and find yourself again. So thanks for that. Jessie, what about from your perspective? You sort of started to touch on that. I mean, I suspect in your initial conversations with, your clients, this idea of helping them reframe asking for help as something that will make you stronger. Tell us about your views on that.
Yeah, I suppose it is not, it's kind of reframing it. It's not seen as asking for help. You're just seen as adding another string to your bow. No one probably had any qualms about seeing their physio, about talking to a nutritionist, about maybe seeing a physiologist and getting those tests. So psychology, it's just normalizing it and trying to see it as this is just another part of performance. And, asking athletes, I'm very fortunate that I get to do a lot of workshops with younger athletes, and that's where you can really have the impact, same as Danielle. You have the impact where they haven't really created really solid beliefs that psychology is not for me, like I would have done when I was an athlete. Don't need that, not for me. And, you can kind of ask the workshop and say, okay, how many people here have had a bad day in the pool, on the track, on the pitch, but it wasn't because of a physical thing? And every hand in the room will go up. And I'll say, well, what could that have been down to? And it's nerves, it's confidence, it's getting distracted by the other team, it's overthinking, it's I was so anxious last night about it. I didn't sleep well, so I didn't perform well. So, kind of identifying, well, that's a psychological skill. You don't need mental support, which sometimes see it as this is a psychological skill that you're just trying to develop the same way as you're trying to improve your technical skills. And so like that, it's not always framing it as asking for help. It's just adding another person to your team, another support and a different support. It's kind of, we do give that perspective. I do give an opportunity to just talk. There's not many of the supports where the athlete is the one doing the talking. They're leading the conversation. And it's a really nice place to be. It can be a really nice space you can create that the athlete comes in and they decide what they want from the hour that you have with them. It's not that they come in with an injury and then I lead, or they come in with a nutritional need and I lead. They're the leaders in that situation, and I'm facilitating it. I'm guiding it.
I just love your style, Jessie, that you just no agenda from your side.
Yeah.
And I know when Danielle mentioned about her experience working with you, I think you used language, Danielle, just like, she just got me. She just got it. She's been there. And you can hear in the way, Jessie, you communicate, just, for someone like Danielle to see themselves in you and who's been through it, say, I didn't care about this stuff either. But actually, I wish I'd had it, is so impactful. I'm curious, just for a bit of crowd participation. Jessie mentioned she asks athletes about maybe when they've had a bad experience, maybe in the pool or on the court or on the pitch. Who here's had a bad day at work before and it's not been physically related? Okay, yeah, I think that's...
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it rings true in both the professional workplace and in sports. Well, look, let's pivot into our second point, Danielle. And I'm really curious because I think you mentioned about coming 8th, and then that sort of, I was at the Worlds and things weren't going well. Our second point in the conversation is about how past failures inspire future success. I'm curious to hear from you, Danielle, about if there was a failure that you experienced that helped springboard you into a success later on, and maybe it's just about expanding on what you've already shared.
Yeah, so I suppose going into those World Championships, I think those were the turning point for me in my whole career. And I was ranked 8th in the world, which is why I had such expectations of going in and just walking into a final, apparently. And I fell short, and not only that, but I felt that we'd done a relay as well, and I felt that we'd let a relay down. And obviously coming into the Olympic cycle, there was a lot of focus put on relays. And so the whole meet as a whole was, in my eyes, awful. But absolutely, like all those 8ths and those 16ths, I would take 1,000 times over, because last year I walked away with a gold medal. And I actually haven't said that out loud, so
I saw you and Rosie comparing medals.
Yeah.
Like,
always trying to
medal showcase.
But yeah, so like it's those little failures, and it's what you learn from. And I think that's again another thing that we took forward into 23-24 season was, every gala was an opportunity, and it was a time to maybe do something different. And if it went well, brilliant, let's add it to the list. If it didn't, let's take it away. And I think, that was the best way to look at it. Swimming is such a long game. We have a full year of training for, as I say, 24 seconds in one day. And it's learning that absolutely does not define you. And I think, my coach has a great saying and is an incredible human as well. And if I have a bad swim, it's this one swim doesn't define your meet, and this one meet will not define your career. And I think, athletes get so hung up on performance, and, as I said, we just forget about, what is behind us, who's looking up to us, and that the time on the scoreboard or whatever it is does not matter at the end of the day. And of course, you can have your goals and your dreams and set them as high as you want, but there's more to that.
Yeah. Just that ability, Danielle, for you, clearly just such maturity to be able to take perspective, see the bigger picture is phenomenal. Jessie, I suspect a lot of the athletes that you work with are in a dark hole of failures in performance, and maybe start there. How do you go about supporting athletes to get themselves out of out of the maybe the opposite mindset that Danielle shared, where you're feeling inadequate, you're not hitting your goals. Do you spend a lot of time there in the room with
That's
folks?
only my mindset because of Jessie. If you'd have spoke to me 2 years ago, it'd have been a very different conversation.
No, I think Danielle has given me an awful lot of credit. Like the work I do, like I said, I'm only a facilitator. The athlete is the one who has to take on board the skills and apply them. So you can get someone who's sitting there cross-armed and looking away. You're not going to have an impact. But Danielle came at a time where she was willing to listen, and you did the work. It's making it sound like I came in with a magic wand. It is not that case at all. I'm not that good. But yeah, and look, every athlete has a different story, and some people come to me when they are at the bottom and you're working back up. But sometimes they come in and they have just added you as part of their team, and you're with them through the journey, and then you're with them on those peaks and troughs as well. So you really meet every athlete at a very different point in their career. And yeah, it's tough. It is tough because as much as I say you're someone who's able to kind of offer that support and you're not as emotionally invested as their parents. I become really emotionally invested. You can't, but when you hear their story, you know the journey that's gone behind winning. When I saw Danielle on that, on that podium, that meant a lot to me because I knew the journey behind that. But when I see someone with a disappointing performance and, walking away looking disappointed, I know what went behind that. So yeah, it's just, I suppose a lot of it is kind of helping accept that like the feelings are normal, that like if you're disappointed after an underperformance, you're meant to feel disappointed, and learning to kind of sit with that for a time and then finding ways like that to learn from it. Okay, well, what happened here? What can we learn? How can we be better next time? And sometimes there isn't like how can we be better next time. Sometimes that disappointment was as much as you had on the day, and just being okay with, unfortunately, that's sport. And like that's a lesson I had to learn, and it's something I kind of pass on, is that sometimes sport's just kind of unfair, and even you can be the hardest worker in the room and you just might not get the results, and that's sometimes can be hard to kind of come to terms with, because there is this idea of like the harder I work, the more successful I'm going to be, and sport's just not like that. Elite sport is just not fair. So yeah, it's challenging, and I think it's just every individual athlete is so different. And some people pull back when they're in those kind of disappointments. Some people really want to work through them. And yeah, again, it's just meeting the athlete where they are and kind of seeing what do they want and letting them lead and kind of me guide. But yeah, there's tough days, definitely.
Yeah, I just love you mentioned it a couple of times about meeting people where they're at, right? And then obviously how you work with Danielle will be different to everyone else. So
Yeah.
look, our third point in our conversation that I want to get on to, which is I think near and dear for me, but I know both of you are keen to have an impact that impact players. The third point is around turning words into action. And so Danielle, can you recall certain things that maybe Jessie gave to you in your first or second, once the tears were dried up, that she was able to then say, hey, try this or do this? Like, what sort of early actions did you take in this experience?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing was that when we go on national teams, that I don't get my coach with me. Unfortunately, I stay at home, watch it on the TV, and I was describing to Jessie the things that were happening at these World Championships that maybe I didn't feel were right, and she said, "Well, did you speak up? Did you let them know? They know how you operate?" No. And she was like, okay, well, that's the starting point, that these guys, they don't work with you every day. They don't know what you're like. You're hard enough because you're ginger and you already are complicated.
I didn't say that.
No, she did say that. But in my, hard to work with. And I know that. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to work with somebody it was 3 weeks we were away for. And if you're going to work with somebody, I've got to learn how to set the boundaries, what I want, what I need, what I necessarily don't want. And that was my first plan of action, was to sit down with the coach that I went away with. And thankfully it was one that I had worked with before, and it was saying, okay, this is what I would like from you this weekend. This is what you'll get in return. And whatever happens in between with the racing. So yeah, that was one of the biggest things, I think, was the communication side of things, and just learning to be open and ask and tell. Don't be scared to say, this is how I operate. Because at the end of the day, they're there to, as Jessie, to facilitate me. They're there to get the best performance in the pool. And I was just always scared to look like that bossy person. Who does she think she is, coming to, demand this from me? But at the end of the day, I'm the one that stands behind the block and does the performance. So
Yeah.
it was learning, to be open and honest in that conversation, before the competition started, to then not have to worry about it, and not get annoyed by little things that were happening.
So much wisdom in this. We're all here to do the same thing, though. There's a shared purpose and a shared goal with your team, Danielle, and everybody wants the best. And for you to make the implicit explicit, and for you to have some agency to say, hey, if you want to get the best out of me, this is what we need to do. And I think, again, that's something I think in the workplace, when I work with folks and I ask them that question, hey, how can I get the best out of you? I try and be proactive because it's uncomfortable to be the one to have to say it rather than being invited to. But certainly, I think what I'm taking from Danielle is a reminder that we have to say to the folks, especially our leaders and our team around us, this is how you'll get the most out of me. So I really value that. Jessie, yeah, what are the consistent actions? Because like we're so lucky to have Jessie and Danielle here, and Jessie is just world class in this space. Like, what are kind of some of the consistent trends around actions that you find yourself often recommending, knowing that everyone is at a different stage?
Good question. I don't know if it's an action, but I suppose practicing self-awareness, if that counts as an action, it's a bit of an abstract action, but I think the best, like that, if you're trying to get the best out of yourself, well, you need to know what my best looks like. I also need to know what are the barriers to my best. And Danielle was very clear with that, and I was lucky. So we were able to work through that. But sometimes, it is about starting with, well, I expect someone to get the best out of me, or I don't like the way this thing is operating, but I don't know what my best is, and I don't know what the things that really irritate me are. So I think that practicing self-awareness, I get athletes to do journals, just talking through different things from different perspectives, kind of sharing the experience, maybe me being devil's advocate. Okay, well, how do you think the coach saw that? Kind of getting a really broad perspective on the situation. Like with Danielle, I was able to ask her, kind of say, well, you're a coach. How would you view this situation? If your athlete isn't telling you anything, but you're expecting a certain behavior. So, yeah, I think that kind of practice of self-awareness is something I always come back to,
Yeah.
because it's the foundation of what I do. I can only work with someone who understands themselves, because I'm relying on what someone tells me to be able to support, facilitate, and guide. So, sometimes it can take a bit of time, and I might not even realize that what they're giving me isn't exactly the accurate or exactly how it happens. And sometimes it might take going to a training session, seeing them in person, being around other teammates, seeing them interact in their space, because obviously me and Danny are on the sofa here. We actually usually only talk on Zoom. It's very rare we're in person together. So I suppose like that, but Danielle was very, very open and very willing to be vulnerable, and was very self-aware. But sometimes I have an athlete in a very unique scenario where it's me on a sofa, they're on a sofa, and it's very different to the dynamics they're used to being in. So being self-aware can sometimes be really hard in that moment. So again, I don't know if it's an action, but I think there's actions to create that kind of awareness.
Well, I love the journaling you mentioned. That's a great way to kind of raise things up, create
So
self-awareness.
simple. Yeah.
Jessie, I don't know if you noticed, Danielle was sniggering there, I think, when you were talking about maybe asking her to think about things from a coach's perspective. Did that land well?
Everybody uses that against me. So
The
what
joys.
would you say to your kids?
Yeah, I love that. I love
Like,
that. Well, listen, we're very close to the end of our conversation. I have one question that I typically ask our guests on the 3 Points podcast to kind of summarize. And I'll let you decide who goes first, but how might the world change if we were all to lean into some of the things you've shared around asking to win?
Jessie?
Okay. How could the world change? Well, I think, like, not to quote like a Brené Brown or someone, but like vulnerability is such a valuable skill. And if we can learn to ask for help, recognize when we need it, and just sorry, I'm messing this up now. This was my moment to get it really right, and I'm messing it up. Yeah, I think just knowing when to ask for help and not being scared too, because I think, especially I'm looking at a room full of mostly women. If there's any men, I'm sorry, but we're not very good at doing it. You know, there is an expectation that we just are competent, we know what we're doing. Why should we? Do we know everything? Do we have, you know, if we're in school, we ask the teacher for help, we weren't expected to know more than them. So why should we now, when we're in a different area, know more? So could it change the world? Not necessarily, but I think it could change this room if all of us were to recognize when I need the help and just asking for it and not getting in our own way.
Thanks, Jessie. And I love that you actually role modeled vulnerability, saying, I want to do this again and I want to do it over. So thank you, Danielle. A round of applause. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Keep going. There's only 45 seconds.
No, I'm done. I am done.
That's 24 seconds in the pool. What you achieve in 24 seconds in the pool is pretty impressive. So,
yeah, listen, I think I'm the perfect example. I think of stepping out of the comfort zone. And you know, whatever your weakness might, you know, it's if you get injured or if you suffer from anything, you know, and the thing that you go to is to work then on your weaknesses that then become your strengths. And then once you get back to 100%, you know, you're unstoppable. And I think that identifying the weakness is the hardest part, actually. And I think that recognizing, as Jessie said, having that self-awareness to step back and look at it just from a different perspective. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a whole load of people in the room right now that you could lean on and ask for help with. But yeah, listen, step one is recognizing in yourself what your weakness is, and whether you want help or not.
Great. Folks, Danielle and Jessie, please.